Just thank you so much for joining us, and I want to welcome you again today to our webinar exploring the new features of the BOT-3. Today is a super exciting day because we have an extremely special guest with us to talk to you about the new bot. It's Dr. Brett Brunix. Along with Dr. Robert Brunix, Dr. Brett Brunix is the author of the BOT-3. He is a kinesiologist and currently an associate professor in the Department of Health and Exercise Science at the Morrison Family College of Health, the University of St. Thomas in St. Paul, Minnesota. Dr. Brunix works closely with allied health professionals, including occupational and physical therapists, on issues related to motor development, performance, and rehabilitation in youth and in adults. He brings a unique perspective of the study of assessment to individuals with motor impairments, having a wide array of experience in human physiology, athletics, exercise psychology, and exercise physiology. I want to personally extend a warm welcome to you, Dr. Brunix, and just thank you for being here today. And I'm Elizabeth Munsell. I'm a licensed occupational therapist, and I have a doctorate in rehabilitation science. I'm the research director for the occupational therapy products here at Pearson, and I had the good fortune of being on the development team for the BOT-3, so I'll also be sharing some of the new features with you today. Dr. Brunix and I are now going to turn our video cameras off for the remainder of our talk, and then we'll jump back on at the end with some questions and answers. Great. So before we jump in, let's take a quick look at our agenda for this webinar. After a brief introduction, Dr. Brunix will give a short overview of the history of the BOT-3. Then he and I will spend some time walking you through many of the new and improved features of the test before we have some time for questions at the end. So for our introduction, instead of us simply introducing the BOT-3, we thought we'd leave it to our marketing team to give an exciting introduction and a sneak peek of the new test. Let's take 30 seconds to watch this video together.
OTs and PTs, get ready to help your clients live their best life. Comprehensive motor assessment is within your grasp. Widely known and trusted for over 4 decades, the BOT has become the go-to test of gross and fine motor skills, and it's gotten a makeover. With updated norms, increased clinical utility, an expanded age range to 25 years, and a simplified kit, the BOT-3 strikes a balance between the test you know and the improvements you'll love.
All right, without further ado, I will pass the mic off to Dr. Brunix to give us some history of the BOT-3.
Thanks, Elizabeth. I'm absolutely excited to be here, and I'm thrilled that I can actually be here with you all for the next hour. Before I start, though, I do have to give a shout out to the original author of the BOT-1 and my mentor, Dr. Robert Brunix, is actually out there in cyber world with all of you. He registered last night, and we're glad to have him here. He's obviously very familiar with the test, but he's really interested in the questions that you have. So throughout the presentation, make sure if you have questions or comments, please put them in the appropriate area, and we'll get to them as if we can. If not, we'll get to them after. So as Elizabeth said, this is quite a process. If you look at the timeline in front of us, wow, I can't believe we're finally here. We went through a huge pandemic to finally get here, but we're so excited to unveil the BOT-3. It's been a fun process, but if you look at kind of the remarkable thing, this test has been around for almost 50 years. So even though we're going to go through some enhancements, the BOT-3 definitely still sticks with the tradition of the original BOT-1 and the BOT-2. However, with some of the new additions and the new changes, as well as the new enhancements, the main thing about the BOT-3 is it's going to make your testing and assessment experience a lot more, let's just say a lot better for the most part. You can go next slide, Elizabeth. All right, perfect. Thank you. All right, so even though we did enhance the test, we also kept consistent with the users. So the bot still supports any B-level and above professionals who are looking for a valid, reliable, and comprehensive measure of motor skills. In terms of our BOT-3 new edition, we put a lot of our energy to support the needs of OTs, PTs, adapted PEs, PE professionals, and a lot of the changes came out of your feedback over the years. So with the consistency of the BOT-2 and the BOT-1, the BOT-3 will assist you in assessing motor development, supporting diagnosis of motor impairment, making placement decisions, developing and evaluating intervention programs, screening, supporting service eligibility. But with our new enhancements, one of our goals was to try to reach a broader audience too. So in addition to OT, PT, and adapted PE, some of the changes and enhancements to the test will also reach users in things like in areas like school psych, the medical fields, and even those in my world of exercise science, exercise physiology, athletic training, and sport and recreation. As you can see, this is not an exhaustive list of our revision goals, but we spent a considerable amount of time as a research team and development team to really identify the areas that we needed to focus in on the BOT-3. We needed to optimize test administration and improve the scoring. So what we did is we added 25% new items to address both the floor and ceiling. We improved and streamlined the quality of the test equipment. We expanded the coverage of fine and gross motor items. We developed new supplemental scores that we're really excited about that help you give you a more comprehensive picture of motor skills. We also updated the normative data, the norming scale, and we extended the testing norms to just name a few. Throughout the rest of this talk too, we'll talk and highlight some of the major changes that we made from subtest to subtest, item to item. Some of the other enhancements that you can see on, especially on the left side, and we'll get to also the right side. The video did talk about an extended age range. The test now goes from 4 to 2511. We also have 2 new testing norms. We have expanded the standardization sample, and we've also improved the testing options. Elizabeth will take you through some of the different testing options, but just briefly, we still have the full kit. We'll have the gross and fine motor options. Those are still in place. But we also enhance each subtest so they can stand on their own and also be used in a variety of ways, so like monitoring interventions and things like that. I know in my field, we use a lot of just subtest by subtest to look at our interventions working. So each test will be able to stand on its own. In addition, we also improved the BOT-3 brief. You probably remember this if you've used the BOT-1 and the BOT-2 as the short form. We've renamed it the brief. We've also expanded the number of items, and it gives you a more comprehensive representation of each of the tests that effectively address the domains within that actual subtest itself. In terms of when that's going to be released, just look for the brief later in the summer or early fall. We've also improved the test structure both at the subtest and item level. So for instance, one of the concerns we had was testing flow as well as to try to reduce fatigue. What we've done is we've redesigned each of the subtests internally, as well as the order of the subtests to improve testing flow. They're now arranged to be more efficient. We've also improved the flow from item to item. And then items in the subtest are also arranged to reduce those issues, perhaps of potential fatigue of your examinee. We've also improved the scoring and interpretation. So hopefully these changes will help streamline your assessments and report generation. Elizabeth will talk about the Q Global option, which is a fantastic enhancement to the BOT-3, and not only from a scoring standpoint, but also a report generation standpoint. With that, one of the requirements we got to was to improve testing time. So what we did with this is the research team, we all got together and talked about how can we really enhance the experience, but also reduce the testing time, given the fact that all of you have a reduced amount of time to spend with each patient or examinee. And so what we ended up doing in one case was to drop a second trial on several of the items. So we did several different types of research on it, and we found dropping a second trial not only allowed for less time, but without sacrificing reliability and validity. But we also instead inserted as teaching trials. So instead of 2 trials, there's going to be a teaching trial where we'll talk about a little bit later. And then also the actual existing trial. This is leading to less testing time, and then less fatigue potentially, and then better results. We also improved, as I said just a second ago, the teaching instructions. We do rely heavily, the test heavily relies on all of you to be creative and use your teaching techniques, but we did enhance both in the easel as well as some other suggestions using things like video demonstrations to help with the teaching of the task. It is important that there is the understanding prior to testing the actual item itself, but have some fun with it. I'm always a big fan of demonstrating. So if you're one that likes to get out there and demonstrate each of the items, we always welcome that. And it's a great way for your examinee to get an idea of what the test or the item is actually looking for. We've also improved some testing equipment. So if you'll see, if you look on the video, there was a black token pad. We've actually replaced the token of the pennies with tokens. We've also enhanced the token pad to do also bimanual testing. We've also looked at things like the test booklet. It's now a standard size, the record forms, and all. Even the target has received an update for this version. We've also added new items to better identify motor performance issues, including things like, as I just mentioned, bimanual control, but an item to look at crossing midline. We've increased the ceiling. We've also extended to the floor. We've added things like complex shapes, and then also enhanced things like the strength and dynamic movement subtest. You might remember the dynamic movement. It may sound a little bit unfamiliar. It used to be called running speed and agility, and I'll actually talk about that in a few minutes. We also have several new performance scores. Elizabeth's going to talk through extensively about the new scores. But asking me, this is one of the things I'm the most excited about. These scores that will help give you a better, more comprehensive picture of motor skills and motor skill development. And we're looking forward to kind of giving you an overview of those today. We've also enhanced the balance subtest and created an extended balance option. So we'll talk through that in a few minutes as we get into the subtest by subtest differences. But what that means is we actually modified the balance subtest to include all floor items, but we did not get rid of the balance beam. The balance beam is important for looking at balance and physiological response in differing environments. So what we did is we created an extended balance, basically a short subtest to be used with the regular kit or regular complete balance subtest. And I'll talk about that in a little bit. Let's see. In addition, we've also looked at changes to some of the other items. So as I kind of mentioned, the balance, we did extend the balance. And the only reason I'm bringing it up one more time is that we recently did some work with other areas including PT, OT, as well as athletic training. And I'm working with a group that is looking at TBI, and we found that extending the balance and using it with the complete balance subtest, we found that is actually very, very effective at looking at things like return to play, as well as intervention when people have TBIs and things like that. So we're really excited about expanding our let's just say our coverage with other professions, to hopefully we can help in assessment of people perhaps who are injured or who have other issues. Yeah. And then finally, we added new technology. Elizabeth will talk a bit about the Q Global, but digital record forms, videos, and reports. And then also we've enhanced the technical data that Elizabeth will talk you through in a few minutes. So I'm going to pass it back to Elizabeth, and I'll see you all in a few minutes.
Great, thanks, Dr. Brunick. So this next slide here is just reinforcing for you that we do have new age-based norms that extend up to 2511. They start at 4 years old. A little bit more about our new norms. With the expanded age range comes the brand new norms. So BOT-3 norms have been updated from the BOT-2 that were developed early in the 2000s. BOT-3 was normed on a standardization sample of over 1,300 examinees that represent the demographics of the 2021 census data. Just a little note that the reason it's important to have these up-to-date norms is because, as we know, cultural and societal changes can impact development of motor skills over time. So when you test someone, you just want to make sure you're comparing your examinees' scores to the most updated norms that reflect the current state of motor performance for the age of the person you're testing. A few more things to note about the new norms in the BOT-3. We'll have far fewer norms tables in the back of the manual because the BOT-3 now provides only combined norms rather than the separate male and female norms from the BOT-2. This decision was made after really careful analysis of the data that demonstrated what we found was a negligible effect of sex on scaled subtest scores. One thing that I'll note is that the reduction of tables should make it easier to navigate the table section of the manual when you're scoring the test. Also, as many of you are aware, the BOT-2 used an atypical norming scale. I know this caused some issues for you, especially those that teach the BOT in university courses. So you'll be pleased to hear that the BOT-3 normative scale has been aligned with other commonly used pediatric tests by applying a traditional scale score with a mean of 10, standard deviation of 3, and standard scores with a mean of 100 and a standard deviation of 15. Dr. Brunix touched on this a bit, but similar to the BOT-2, there are several different administration options that are available when using the BOT-3. It's one of the great assets of this test is that you can use it comprehensively, and then you can also pick and choose based on your evaluation question. The full test or the complete kit, which comes in a print or a digital format, is your first option that you could use. The full test really is preferred because it provides the most reliable and comprehensive measure of overall motor proficiency, which ultimately will enable you as the examiner to conduct a broad investigation of the examinee's motor strengths and challenges. But you can also administer select domains, for example, 2 domains within the fine motor or the gross motor composites. These are also sold as standalone kits, the fine motor and the gross motor kits. Or you can choose to administer select subtests or just the select items that comprise one of our new supplemental scores. And then lastly, the new BOT brief, which is available this fall, will provide a higher level look at overall motor proficiency using a subset of the BOT-3 items. A little more on that later. As Brett mentioned, we did some restructuring of the BOT-3. This is an overview of the full BOT-3 structure. You'll see that 8 subtests make up 4 motor area domains, a fine and a gross motor composite, and then the overall total motor composite. The subtests, as well as items within the subtests, have been restructured to help reduce testing time and examinee fatigue, which should help ensure better results from the BOT-3 test. We recommend that when administering the full test, you administer the subtests in order, starting with fine motor precision and ending with dynamic movement. The subtests are sequenced logically within the BOT-3 so that all the paper and pencil activities come first, and then the activities involving greater physical exertion will come at the end of the battery. So we've also improved the testing and scoring time on the BOT-3 compared to the BOT-2. As Dr. Brunix mentioned briefly, all of the items from the BOT-2 that required 2 test trials have had that second test trial dropped. So now examinees will only perform 1 trial per item. This was based on some analysis that was done early into the test development process where we found really no substantial difference in test outcomes with the provision of 2 versus 1 trial. So we removed that second trial and freed up some time and space to make room for new items without adding to the overall administration time, which makes for a more comprehensive content within the test. What this means, though, is that examiners will now need to be very diligent about teaching the tasks before they begin the formal assessment, and I'll talk a bit more about how we've enhanced the teaching support for these items on the next slide. We've also redeveloped items like the shuttle run to make up for, now requires less length, and that makes for a more efficient option to test in a wider variety of locations. And then regarding scoring, the scoring guidelines for fine motor integration items now have more detailed and specific rules, including more examples, which should reduce subjectivity in scoring and give you more certainty that you're scoring these items correctly. Also, the way the push-ups items are scored have been simplified. Now you're assigning different item points on the record form for knee and full push-ups, which means that on the BOT-3, you no longer have separate norms tables for these different push-up types. So with this change, in addition to the removal of the sex-based norms, the number of norms tables that you need to navigate have been drastically decreased. So hopefully that will make scoring easier, faster, and less prone to mistakes. As I mentioned, the removal of that second test trial from several items makes adequately teaching the task extremely important for the BOT-3. We also want to make sure that the assessment administration process is nice and smooth for you, the examiner. So we provide several enhancements in the BOT-3 to support these goals. We have improved teaching text, reordered subtests and items within the subtests to enhance efficiency, like I mentioned earlier. We've also updated the photos for all of the items. And then in addition to our suggested teaching text, our teaching script, and the pictures that are included in the admin easel, we also now have new demonstration videos that you can use to learn the new task and also show the examinee to help them understand the task. These demonstration videos are accessible through a link through Q Global. They're super useful in situations where an examiner, for instance, may not be able to physically demonstrate the tasks themselves, or in a situation where an examinee perhaps learns better from a visual demonstration rather than a verbal description. Really, we encourage you to use these demonstration videos as an optional extra for any time you need them as part of learning or teaching a task. And in addition to these new features, we have new digital options, including digital administration, scoring, and report generation that are offered for the BOT-3. So let's talk about a bit more about these new digital options that are available on Q Global, which is Pearson's online assessment platform. So with the BOT-2, after administering the test, you have the ability to enter those scores from the paper record form into Q Global and then generate a score report at the click of a button. So we will still have this option for BOT-3, but now we have a new option to use on-screen administration through Q Global as well. When you use on-screen administration, you don't need the administration easel because all of the instruction that the examiner uses are built right there into the platform and you see them on the screen. You also don't need a paper record form because you enter the data directly into the platform on Q Global. So those of you who are familiar with the bot, and we know we have several of you here, you might be wondering about the examinee facing pictures that are shown in that traditional administration easel if all the other content is now shown on a screen. So if you do choose the on-screen administration version of the BOT-3, there's an item picture book that you can use to show the examinee the photos of what they need to do. This looks like a thinner version of the easel with just the examinee pictures, and it's included in the digital kit for the BOT-3. You will also still use the BOT-3 manipulatives and the response booklet for the paper and pencil items in the first 3 subtests. Once you're done administering the test, you can generate a score report just like you would with the manual data entry on Q Global. Something to note for those of you interested in these digital options, the digital record forms are included in the BOT-3 digital kit, but even if you buy the print kit, you can purchase the digital record forms in any quantity to supplement your kit supplies, your print kit supplies. And then also, we wanted to mention that these BOT-3 offerings are included in DALL subscriptions, which is Pearson's digital assessment library. Lastly on this slide, I just want to note that the new on-screen administration option for the BOT-3 can make administering the BOT-3 via telepractice a bit more convenient. However, we always want to remind folks that it's important to read and understand the BOT telepractice guidelines on the Pearson website before choosing to administer the BOT via telepractice. So here are some screenshots of the 2 different types of digital offerings for the BOT-3. They're very small, but this is just to give you a taste of what's going on for the 2 different types. On the left side, it shows manual entry. This is what we had available in BOT-2. Here you can enter item raw scores, which is what's shown on the page, or total point scores for subtests and supplemental scores after filling out the paper record form. And then on the right side, we show an example of one item from the on-screen administration offering. You can see that all the content from the administration easel that the examiner needs to see is included in those little expandable boxes, as well as a timer and a place to record the score. It isn't shown here, but just below the score, we have the demonstration video for that item. So it's really easy just to click that video and play it for yourself or for an examinee. Just a reminder that both of these versions of the BOT-3 and Q Global do come with a full BOT-3 score report after you administer the test. I encourage you all, once the BOT-3 is released on Q Global in the first week of June, make a Q Global account for yourself. It's free, and then you can check out these options for yourself. All right, back to you, Dr. Brunix, to continue telling us more about the new features of the bot.
Thanks, Elizabeth. As you can tell, hopefully well, you can't really see my excitement, but just looking at all those new features, just as Elizabeth went through, are pretty exciting, and hopefully they'll be well received by all of you and make your lives a little easier. But in addition to like all of the different things, that changes that are in front of you on this slide itself, the bot not only features a new updated look. I love the logo. Just want to throw a plug in there for whoever designed that one, the art department. But as Elizabeth talked about, the manual, the record forms, and the response booklets are all updated and easier to use. You can go to the next one if you want to. Perfect. But same thing, just to kind of give you a nice little look of what it looks like. Yes, keep it somewhat consistent with the BOT-2, but it is updated, a fresher look, and then the manual itself has been really well designed and organized. It makes things a lot more logical and also a lot more easier to use, I should say that. You can go ahead, 19, if you want to. Perfect. So the brand new penny pad up in the upper right, absolutely love it. You'll notice that the tokens themselves have been replaced, or the pennies have been replaced with tokens, so no longer do you have to search in your ashtray to find extra pennies in case somebody walks off with them. But you'll also see that the actual penny pad's been designed to do also testing, not only but single but bimanual items like that. In addition, we've also improved all the subtests at the item level. So whether we improved, omitted, or actually I should say enhanced an item, you'll see that there are some changes within each subtest, which I'm going to take you through for the most part. We've also strengthened subtests, expanded items in difficulty, given the fact that we have a new age range. And we've also added items to assess areas like crossing the midline. We've also added items to examine the behaviors associated with handwriting skills. Again, expanded the floor and the ceiling. You'll see as we kind of go through subtest by subtest, I'll point out some of the areas that have been enhanced, or let's just say changed, to make things a lot more effective in working with younger, as well as some of the older examinees that you might use. And as I said earlier, we have a couple other enhancements. For instance, we've enhanced the balance and the strength and let's say dynamic movement tests to also include things that are a little bit more applicable to things like ADLs, mobility, etc. Okay, good. So what I'm going to do in just the next few minutes is take you through subtest by subtest. You'll notice too that the order of the subtests have changed just slightly. Keep in mind too that the order of the items within each subtest, we're not going to feature them all today, but we'll actually point out some of the new enhancements that are made, as well as some of the changes that will help things increase, or should reduce testing time, but also improve those issues like fatigue during the testing process. All right. So a few of our goals in the vision that we've already touched upon, besides the ones we've already touched upon, we wanted to make sure that each subtest, if you could take a look all the way through from fine motor all the way through dynamic movement, that each subtest had equal representation. Each subtest could stand on its own. We also made sure that we removed any redundancy, or tried to, in which case wasn't useful, and then make sure we had items that were added that were backed by most recent research. If we go to slide 21, we can start with fine motor precision. We have a total of 7 items. Not a lot of changes here, but we do have a little bit more flexibility with the writing utensils and things like that. But still 7 total items. And if you're keeping count as we get through dynamic movement, you'll see that there is a better representation of items within each subtest. We were able to add items because of the dropping of the second trial, and these are items we're really excited about, and hopefully they help give you the information that you're looking for. In terms of the fine motor integration, we added 2 items. We did remove the star, and that was one that was highly recommended by professionals in your fields as we did our focus groups and things like that. We also found in our research by adding both a cube and a copying of a 2-part figure that we actually captured many of the same, let's just say, skill sets that the star did. So we ended up as a team dropping the star and adding these 2 exciting new figures. Go to the next. In the manual dexterity, even though this has always been a really well-performing test, we didn't tweak it too much. However, we did drop making dots, and we added some things instead to really address the handwriting skills portion, like drawing arcs, making cross lines and circles. And we also added that bimanual token item. So as we saw in one of the previous pictures, the token mat does look a little different. I like this new look. The actual tokens do jump off, and we found that it was easier for examinees to pick up the tokens versus the pennies, and we're excited about that and some of the changes that way. We can go to the next one. In upper limb coordination, not a huge change here, but we did add a floor item and rolling the ball at the target. You'll also see that the target has been redesigned. We found that this was a very important skill itself, and you'll find as Elizabeth goes through one of the special scores that we have embedded in the test, that rolling the ball is one of those skill sets of looking at things like physical literacy, and we'll kind of talk through that in a few minutes. In terms of bilateral coordination, we made 2 huge enhancements here. We did add a crossing the midline hand-to-knee item, as well as brought back one of the original BOT-MP. For those of you who use the BOT-1, we brought back a variation of the touching thumbs to fingertips synchronized, and this time we're doing eyes closed. So it was a very useful item that we omitted in the BOT-2, but we wanted to bring that back given its clinical value. Right. The balance has been probably, if you look at some of the subtests themselves, has had I want to say like a new makeover, we'll put it that way. So Instead of using the balance beam in the regular kit, the complete kit, we have adapted many of those items, actually all those items, to the floor. Purpose of doing that was to also expand the coverage, making it sure, I should say, not expand the coverage, but making sure that we address the needs of people perhaps in rural as well as clinical. So we did actually take the balance beam out, but what we did add in there was very many research-based, both static and dynamic balance. So the idea is to administer these, obviously, and to look at the balance issues, but there is very clear research on assessing balance in both a dynamic and static environments for the most part. And it's, instead of doing things, so what we did is we added things like walking backwards. We also added a dynamic head turn item, very much related to things like ADL, working in play and different areas like that. We can go a little bit, just I'll keep it on this one too. You'll see on the upper right hand the extended balance. We do, as I mentioned earlier, we are still using the balance beam. This extended balance item, or this set of 5 items, are to be used with the balance subtest within the major test. The 5 static and dynamic balance are going to be balance items are going to be on the beam, and combined it gives you 14 items to assess balance in several environments. I worked as just a kind of a side note, just as I mentioned earlier, I did work with several different researchers looking at learning and traumatic brain injury, of how it affects learning across the age spectrum. And one of the areas that they really wanted to look at was not only things like the fine motor, but they also wanted to look at and incorporate balance. So we talked a lot about using balance in different environments, and they found it very helpful and very beneficial to do things not only on the floor, but also in an elevated environment using the balance beam. So if you kind of look at the idea of extended balance, we just included this slide just to give you an idea. The goal of extending the balance was to really give users an opportunity to assess both static and dynamic balances, changes over time, through intervention. Injuries, I mentioned, kind of the TBIs is a big deal in my world, and measuring balance in different areas not only helps with looking at things like gait, and also our different environments helps. So looks at things like gait as well as things like activities in daily living. And then as we kind of progress into our next slide, strength. The strength test was given a little bit of an uplift, I'll put it that way. So instead of the wall sit, we actually replaced the wall sit with a dynamic squat, primarily because of its usefulness in looking at things like activities of daily living, play, sport participation, etc. We also added a plank and then a supine isometric flexion. And then we still have the V-up, but we just renamed it the prone isometric extension. And then finally, we have the dynamic movement. You might remember this as running speed and agility. We added, as Elizabeth talked about, we basically altered the shuttle run course to be more consistent with other tests out there, especially in the sport and recreation field. This also allows you not having to come up with so much space to administer the test. At the same time, we've also, let's put it this way, we give you enough time in terms of our research to make sure you're looking at gait, have a good gait analysis, and make your observations, as well as looking at running speed. Dynamic movement, as we said, used to be called running speed and agility. We changed the name to reflect the current terminology in the field, but also with the addition of new items that address different planes of movement, we found that dynamic movement was a better suited title for the subtest. The biggest enhancement, like I said before, is a shuttle run course, but then we also added a lateral crossover item. It is something that we use a variation of lateral crossovers in a lot of different things in rehab, as well as in things like in my field, in exercise science, exercise physiology, to look at being able to cross the midline. But using this type of assessment or item will give you not only a glimpse in the ability to move laterally, but also crossing the midline with the lower body, and then look at a glimpse, give you a glimpse into knee and pelvic stability. So that's it for me as far as like going through some of the different changes within the subtest. I'm going to pass back to Elizabeth, and then I'll see you all at the Q&A.
Great. Thank you, Dr. Brunix. So he mentioned earlier, and I would agree, as exciting as all those other changes are, the real game changers and features that we are really most excited about as the BOT-3 development team are the new scores we've added. So I will share a bit about those now. We have 3 new supplemental scores that have been developed to specifically meet the clinical needs of you all, our BOT-2 users. So we've also introduced growth scale values, which perhaps you may have seen in other tests like the Bailey-4, but they're brand new for the bot. The first supplemental score we'll cover is called Movement Fundamentals, and it's related to fundamental movement skills. So fundamental movement skills are the foundational skills needed for successful participation in play, recreation, and sport across the life course. And these are really thought of as our building block or foundational skills for motor performance. They typically develop and mature around the age of 10 to 12. In scientific literature on the topic of movement, fundamental movement skills, they're divided into 3 domains, which is object manipulation, balance, and locomotion. So knowing that proficiency in fundamental movement skills is an important aspect of motor development, we used items from the BOT-3 to develop a supplemental score that captures these skills. We selected the easiest items on the BOT-3 that relate to the 3 fundamental movement skill domains. Again, those are object manipulation, balance, and locomotion. The final score consists of 13 items across these 5 BOT-3 subtests that are in orange. As I mentioned before, because these skills are typically maturing around the age of 10, the purpose of the movement fundamental score is to really help track the development of these skills and progress towards physical literacy in these areas. So because of this, the score is criterion referenced rather than norm referenced and uses descriptive categories of emerging, developing, or proficient. This score may be particularly useful for describing and tracking motor development in younger examinees or examinees with more pronounced motor challenges. I'll also add that you can see that the subtests that we pull these items from are across both the fine and the gross motor subtests. So this is a score that is only available if you're using the full test or have access to the full test. You can get this score calculated through Q Global, or you can do it yourself. It's on the last page of the record form. The next supplemental score that I want to highlight is skilled manual performance. The skilled manual performance score specifically describes fine and visual motor skills by combining those first 3 subtests of the BOT-3, fine motor precision, fine motor integration, and manual dexterity, to provide what we're calling a pure measure of fine motor abilities. So we know that in particular OTs often administer just those first 3 subtests. So this new score can allow you to calculate a fine motor composite that does not include the upper limb coordination subtest. In effect, this takes out the measure of ball skills in the overall fine motor composite score. The skilled manual performance score is a norm reference standard score, so it can be used to demonstrate a need or help qualify someone for services related to fine motor performance. And then the last supplemental score that we've added to the BOT-3 is planning and coordination. The planning and coordination score is derived from items from 7 different subtests. So that's all subtests except for fine motor integration. And these items specifically relate to issues with planning and motor coordination. When we developed this score, the items were selected using a sample of examinees with developmental coordination disorder. So logically, this score can really help identify clinical populations with those related challenges, like issues related to praxis and motor planning. That includes individuals with developmental coordination disorder, autism, but is not limited to those groups. Anybody who shows praxis, motor planning, or coordination challenges would be great for this score. And this also helps allow better documentation in these specific motor domains, which was missing in the previous BOT. The last new type of score that I want to talk about are growth scale values, or GSVs. GSVs are provided for all 8 subtests on the BOT-3 and the extended balance score that Dr. Brunix introduced earlier. GSVs allow you to measure progress against an examinee's own previous performance rather than against an age-based normative sample. So I want you to think of these really as a psychometrically sound alternative to describing your examinee's improvement based on change in their total point score on a subtest. I know sometimes we default to that, but total point scores really are not an equal interval. So for instance, improvement of 1 point score from say 29 to 30 points on a subtest could mean something different in terms of skill development than improvement from 10 to 11 points. So we can use GSVs as a score metric that are based on total point scores, but have equal intervals between each point, just like a ruler. And they're better than using our total point scores to demonstrate change over time. These are really useful for examinees whose motor skills are delayed or developing at a slower rate than their peers. These examinees, as we know, are likely to continue scoring in like a below average category or well below average category when compared to their peers, but they are showing gains in skills over time that you would want to capture in your evaluations and reevaluations. So here's an example that you may have experienced in your clinical practice that can illustrate how GSVs can be useful. So this examinee, case A, was tested using the BOT twice. And in between those times, the examiner was working with them on their motor skills and really saw significant improvement. This slide shows their scores from the first to second administration of the BOT-3 using those norm reference scaled scores on the left, and then the GSVs on the right. So you can see that despite the improvements that the examiner noticed in their fine and gross motor skills, not all of the BOT age-based norms reflect that improvement because the examinee may be developing skills, say, at a rate slower than their peers, which would be the case for the bilateral coordination subtest where we see a decrease in their score, or perhaps at the same rate, which is the case for those last 3 gross motor subtests where you don't see a change in the scaled score. So in either instance, the examinee is not closing that gap in their age-based norms. However, if you then look to the right of the slide at the GSV tracking table, this tracking table is available in the BOT-3 manual as a reproducible page, so you can use it for any examinee. You can see how using GSVs to quantify the skill development on each of the BOT-3 subtests can really tell a different side of that story. So using the GSV comparison table provided in the BOT-3 manual, this examiner was able to demonstrate that their examinee made significant improvements in each skill area from test 1 to test 2. So you can see that we're really excited about this, the clinical utility of these, the ability to really look at strengths and improvements in a clear way, and we hope that you find this useful in your practice also. All right, so switching gears a bit, this slide and the next cover reliability and validity of the new BOT-3 test. What I will say is that psychometrics for these tests are super strong, and the slides will be included in the webinar handout. But looking at the time and knowing that I want to save some time for our Q&A, I'm going to skip these slides, and we're going to move on to talking a bit about the BOT brief and then have some time for our questions and answers. All right, so lastly, before we launch into the Q&A, let's just talk a bit more about the new BOT-3 brief. The brief is an update to the BOT-2 brief form and a replacement for that BOT short form. It is a 20-item assessment with 10 fine motor and 10 gross motor items. All the items from the BOT-3 brief originated in the BOT-3 and were selected specifically for their clinical utility, their content coverage, and to have an ease of administration with the shorter item set. So just like the BOT-2 brief form, the BOT-3 brief provides a brief total motor score, which is the summary score for the test, and it's a norm reference score of overall motor performance. In addition, we're very excited because the BOT-3 brief will also have 2 new scores for fine and gross motor performance. These will be age-based cut scores, which will identify an examinee as performing in average and above average category, below average, or well below average for their age group. The BOT-3 brief can be used for initial screening, program evaluation, research, or other applications where a high-level assessment of motor proficiency is useful. But we do want to note that the brief does not provide that in-depth assessment that's often needed for things like eligibility determination, intervention planning, supporting diagnostic decision-making, etc. So we'd really recommend using the full BOT for those purposes. The BOT-3 brief may be purchased separately or as a bundle with the full BOT-3 kit, and we are excited that that will be releasing in the fall of 2024. Okay, so that's a lot of information about what to expect in the new BOT-3. We hope you all are as excited as we are about this new test. You can find more information about the BOT-3 on our website. We have some commonly asked questions there, as well as resources like sample reports. And then also, please do feel free to reach out to your local assessment consultant who can help you find the information that you need. We are very excited to report that the new kits will be starting to ship at the end of next week, and that the BOT-3 on Q Global will be released shortly after on June 6th. All right, now I'm going to invite Dr. Brunix to come on video, and I believe Shelley Hughes will be asking us some questions. So thank you so much for your time.
Thank you, guys. We've had a ton of questions through that, and I know Selena and I have been busy answering them. So if we don't get through everybody's questions, because I've flagged quite a few here for answering live, please resubmit them at the end on the survey that you get at the end, and we'll make sure that somebody gets back to you on answering those questions. So hopefully none of these will kind of throw you too much, and we'll be able to get through them all. There's quite a lot. In fact, they're building as I'm speaking now. So I think you spoke to this already, and this question probably came in before you were covering this section, but does the new testing norms include children with autism as part of the norms? We're starting to be asked if tests include children with autism. And I think you spoke about this in the validity studies, but may want to kind of cover that again.
Yeah, so I sort of skipped over that, but just briefly, we had 4 different clinical groups where we looked at the BOT as being able to identify a clinical group against a matched control. Autism was one of those groups, as well as developmental coordination disorder, mild motor challenges, and developmental delay in the motor domain. And then in addition, we did seed into our standardization sample some students with autism, and we used the IES data for the different IDEA qualifying categories to determine how many to seed into our sample. So yes, they're in both places, both represented in the norms as well as in our clinical studies.
Wonderful, thank you, Elizabeth. Okay, another question is, have there been changes to the upper limb coordination portion of the test, or is everything still using a tennis ball? I have tested a large number of kids who have never seen a tennis ball until the test, which potentially skews scores. I know we have new items in there with the rolling at the target, so maybe you could address that question.
Dr. Brunix, you want to take that?
Did we try? So I'm just going to understand the question. Did we try to use a different ball, or is it always going to be the tennis ball? Is that the idea?
Yeah. Do we look at anything else, or does everything use a tennis ball? I know that we still use a tennis ball. There are reasons why, and we have some new items using the tennis ball as well. So maybe you want to talk to that.
Yes, everything was standardized using the tennis ball. So we did look at other options. The options were kind of few and far between, and we settled. Well, not settled. We really secured the tennis ball, knowing that they're accessible, knowing that they're easy to get a hold of, just in case you have to replace them, as well as, yes, the tennis ball there isn't like the perfect ball out there, but we found with the rolling and also the dribbling, as well as the catching, it basically with hand size was another issue. So we wanted to make sure we had one very standardized ball, and that was the tennis ball.
And I'll also add that it's true that some folks have not seen a tennis ball, but that's also the case in our standardization sample. So in some ways, that's why we collect such a big sample, that those variations are controlled for when we develop our norms. It's the kind of thing that you'd want to note in your report to say, for instance, on an individual level, this might have been a little bit harder for this person because they've never seen a tennis ball before.
Excellent. Thank you to both of you. Okay, another one. Could we elaborate on the statement that there is negligible difference between male and female norms? If maybe you could elaborate on that a little bit more.
Yeah, I can talk about that. So what we ended up doing, we looked at this several different ways, but remember that we're not looking at individual items. We're looking at a subtest score as a whole, because that's what our norm scores are based on. So there may have been some individual item differences for select items based on sex or gender in certain subtests, but as a whole, we did not see those differences. In fact, we actually saw effect sizes that were either the same or smaller than the effect of parent education level or region. So these are very small differences. I'll also say that yes, strength in males and females is different, but that's typically like after puberty. And what we have is really sort of a ceiling on that strength test. Once we're getting to the older ages, the test is not looking at really high level strength. So those differences are not showing up in the items specific to the bot. If you had a more in-depth test of strength that really looked at like your maximum strength capacity, yeah, you would see those differences, but not for the content that's included in the strength subtest of the bot, and not for the main ages that we're using this test for.
Excellent, thank you. Another one I think is a useful question is there was mention of subtest order as designed to go from least physically taxing to most. Is it recommended that the subtests always be administered in that order, or is it acceptable to change the order and administer in a sort of more flexible order of administration?
You go ahead, Brett.
I'll take that one. Yes, administer them all in the order. That's kind of how it was standardized. If there is a need for perhaps a break, finish the subtest and then provide a break. But yes, everything should be administered from 1 to 7, 1 to 8, whatever the item numbers are.
Right. And the reason for that is because that's how the norms were developed. So if there is an effect of fatigue on the later tests or something like that, those are built into the norms because everybody who took the test in the normative sample took the test in that order. That said, we're clinicians. We understand that that's not always the way that you can do things in clinical practice. Again, anytime you deviate from this standardized process, you want to note that in your report to make sure that people are considering that when they are looking at the normative scores for your examinee.
Wonderful, thank you very much. Okay, another one, there's a few questions along the same theme here, and it's to do with retesting and reassessment, especially when using the growth scale values. So is there a recommended test retest time between first and second administration, whether that's just for the overall BOT for your normative scores or for the growth scale values? I think that captures several questions there.
Okay. Well, so for GSVs, if you're looking to compare those GSVs and look at statistical significance that we provide for the tables in the BOT-3 manual, that's going to be at every year. So you can administer that at minimum a year apart to look at those significant changes in scores. It should work really well for people who are on like an IEP rotation where you're doing a reevaluation every 3 years. You can definitely look at GSV changes for that. Then just sort of thinking about the question of how often can you retest, that really depends on motor development and the age that you're testing. You can kind of use our norm groups to give an idea of what you'd expect to see. So our norm groups have much smaller age bands at the younger ages, and then they expand quite a bit as they get older. If you're at a younger age and your person is moving to a different norm band, they may be appropriate to retest, considering that they don't have a huge learning effect and it's not so super close to when you tested them previously. Then as they get older, where you wouldn't really expect to see as many changes, it's not as appropriate to test them as frequently.
Wonderful, thank you. Okay, another question here. Is there more detail on fine motor precision for the scoring criteria? So for example, if one student completely coloured in the shapes of the circle and star, but they scribbled very far outside the shape, is there more criteria on how to score those items?
You want to go ahead, Brett?
Yeah, one request we really got was to include more scoring samples as well as refine the scoring actual rubric for the most part. And it is better defined. It'll have not only examples, but the scoring rules are a lot more succinct and they address issues like you just brought up in that question.
Thank you very much. Okay, right. Right, we've got 4 minutes left, so maybe time for 1 or 2 more questions, but we've got about 35 unanswered questions here. So I don't know when we can get through them all, which is there's some really good questions. So I think this question goes, I think Brett, you kind of talked about this anyway, but is there a limit to how many times you use the video for training the subject, or can you use it as many times as needed? And thinking about it in terms of the practice element of the test as well. So I think you covered it, but maybe we just want to elaborate on that a little bit more.
You want this one? You want me to take it?
Yeah, if you want to take.
You could take it. They want to hear from you.
we want to make sure that the videos and the teaching texts are used so there is understanding of the item or the task within that item. So in terms of how many times, I guess it's going to be individually specific. I don't think we didn't standardize a limit. As long as there's understanding and they understand the task, what's expected of them. That's the main point of those videos, as well as the teaching instructions.
Yeah, what I like to say is that this is a motor test. It is not a test of cognition. So we don't want to have them not understand the item and have that be the reason for poor motor performance on the item. So use those videos, make sure there's a real understanding of what the task is supposed to be. And then we do minimize or require only a certain number of practice attempts because we don't want them to have that motor practice. But then we want to see their actual motor performance when it comes time for the test trial.
Excellent, thank you. Okay, another one just related to GSVs, gross scale values. Are these going to be available within the Q Global scoring platform? I believe
Yes.
they are, but you could, yes. Yes,
They are.
excellent. That's an easy one. Okay, that's answered several of those questions then. Will there be training video created? We are creating some training content that will be available. I can just answer that one really quickly off the cuff. So that will be available in due course, free of charge as well.
And Shelley, I will add just to the question about the GSVs on Q Global. So
Yep.
Q Global will give you all of the scores that you get on the paper record form, as long as you administer those items. So if you administer the full test, you're getting all the scores, and that includes things like pairwise comparisons, which I know sometimes in practice we might not have time to do and we will skip, but they're really interesting and important when you're analyzing the results of an assessment. So I highly encourage you to check out some of those Q Global options, and you'll just get all the scores you could ever ask for.
Marvelous. And I'm going to leave, there's one last question, which I think is a really important one. Are we able to use BOT-2 scores from previous years to compare to BOT-3 scores? What are the best options for comparing BOT-2 to BOT-3?
Right. So I will encourage those who are interested in that to take a look at the manual, because we do have correlations between BOT-2 to BOT-3. They're relatively high. The things that have changed are, but note that there are several things that have changed. One, we're on a completely new norm scale. So we have different means and standard deviations for those, making it a bit hard to compare. The demographics of the standardized sample have changed from 2020 to 2000 to 2021, which is what we matched on. And the items have changed in the bot, as well as some of the scoring. So keep that in mind. We do talk about that in the manual and have sort of an analysis of how to look at those things. Overall, scores are as comparable as we would expect them to be. We see still that BOT is really good at differentiating between clinical populations versus populations without a motor disorder. So all of those things still hold, but making that exact comparison can be pretty difficult given those changes in how the norms were developed and how the test is structured.
Marvelous. And on that, I'm going to leave the rest of the questions. I think there's still potentially 40 unanswered there. So apologies we couldn't get through them all, but I hopefully we addressed the bulk of them there. So yeah, thank you very much. I'll pass it back to you two to close us out.
Yeah, thank you so much for joining us and chatting about the new bot. Put your unanswered questions in that follow-up webinar box that asks you if you have anything else you want to share. We will get back to you. And I just want to thank you, Dr. Brunix, again for taking some time to talk about the new test. I know it's been a labor of love, and we're really excited to hear what everybody thinks of it.
Great stuff. Thanks for having me, and thanks for everybody attending. This is great.